David had always been afraid of heights, not just planes or balconies. It was the fear of falling, of failing, of being exposed. Maybe that's why he spent most of his life playing it safe. Steady job, bills paid on time, vacations in the same place for 12 years. He took pride in being stable, predictable. But at 50, stability turned into a cliff. The company he'd worked at since he was 24 shut down. He wasn't fired. He was phased out, as they said. He just stood there, holding the termination letter, unsure whether to laugh or cry. It felt like someone had unplugged the outlet where his life had always been connected. For weeks, he tried to stick to the routine. Woke up at the same hour, drank coffee from the same mug, pretended he still had somewhere to go. But he didn't. And harder than explaining that to others was admitting it to himself. "You're too old to start over," said one voice inside him. "You're too young to give up," said another. And so the battle began. Not against the job market, his age, or his bank account, but against the idea that, after 50, all that's left is watching life go by from a park bench. But what if that's not true? What if starting over at 50 is exactly what makes sense? What if what people call madness is actually the greatest act of courage? David spent the first days trying to update his resume. He erased, rewrote, searched for synonyms for words like resilient and dynamic, trying to sound younger on paper than he felt in the mirror. He didn't know what was worse, getting no responses, or getting the rare one that said, "Not the profile we're looking for." One morning he found himself sitting on the couch staring at a cup of cold coffee. Was it Tuesday or Wednesday? He no longer knew. Time had lost shape. The world seemed to be spinning on a different frequency, and he couldn't tune in. Then he remembered something his daughter once said during an ordinary dinner. "Dad, you always wanted to open that diner, remember? The one with the lamb burger and the coffee milkshake." He had laughed at the time, and he laughed now too. But in the following days, that memory kept coming back, like a stubborn ad in his head. Eventually, he jotted down the burger recipe just for fun. The next day, he bought the ingredients, cooked, tasted. It wasn't bad. Actually, it was pretty good. It wasn't a plan, just an escape. Or so he thought. But that small experience reignited something long forgotten. Enthusiasm. Not the euphoric enthusiasm of a boy dreaming big, but the quiet excitement of a man who's stumbled, fallen, and still wants to move forward. For the first time in weeks, David felt like waking up early. But along with that feeling came fear. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail in front of everyone? What if I regret even trying? Maybe your name isn't David. Maybe you've never dreamed of opening a diner. But chances are you felt this fear. The fear of starting from scratch when everyone expects you to already have it all figured out. There's this invisible pressure that hovers around the age of 50, as if by now your life should be neatly in place, as if doubt were a sin, mistakes a shame, and starting over, a failure. But who said that? Who decided that changing paths at 50 means you've failed? You know what's really scary? Not starting over. It is continuing to live something that already ended, just because it's easier to explain to other people. Some people change careers at 50. Some leave long marriages. Some start running marathons, learn an instrument, move to a new city, learn to say no, or finally learn to say yes. Because there comes a moment in life, and it comes for everyone sooner or later, when the question shifts from, "What do people expect from me?" to, "What do I expect from my life?" And the answer doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes in silence, in uncertainty, in sleepless nights and days full of doubt. But it can also come with joy, purpose, and a peace you forgot even existed. David didn't become a famous chef, though for 5 minutes he did consider applying to Master Chef. But he did open the diner, small, just 3 tables and a slightly crooked counter. In the first days, he did everything. Bought the ingredients, grilled the burgers, served the customers, and washed the dishes. On the second day, he broke 2 glasses. On the third, he burned a bun. On the fourth, he nearly cried, from exhaustion and from joy. An old coworker stopped by and said, "David, are you crazy? Starting a business now?" And David, with a dish towel on his shoulder and sauce on his shirt, answered, "I am. Crazy with excitement." Little by little, the neighbors started showing up. The food was good, but what really drew people in was the atmosphere. Regular folks, good music playing softly, honest conversations. Some customers became friends. Others said, "I really needed to hear this today." David was still afraid. But it was a new kind of fear. The kind that walks hand in hand with hope. The kind of fear that comes with taking a risk that's worth it. The fear of someone who is truly living. And here's the curious thing. David realized that starting over at 50 is harder, yes, but it's also lighter, because you're no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. You just want to be true to who you are. And that, my friend, that brings a kind of freedom that's hard to describe. Not everyone understood what David was doing. Some people supported him with a crooked smile, saying good luck the same way you'd say, poor guy. Some thought it was inspiring, as long as it wasn't their own life. And a few even seemed offended. "You threw away everything you built?" they asked. But there were surprises too. A retired colleague stopped by to eat and left inspired. A 60-year-old neighbor who had never worked outside the home asked if he needed help on weekends. And a delivery guy in his 20s said he wanted to learn how to make that burger. David began to see that starting over wasn't just about him. It was about showing, without preaching, that no one is locked into a script. That changing paths doesn't have to be dramatic or perfect, it just has to be real. And the funniest part? Even the critics stayed. They ordered another burger, and they'd say the place felt different. Lighter. Maybe without realizing it, they were also tasting the possibility of change. Not every new beginning comes with a grand opening, a business license, or a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Sometimes it happens quietly at home. In that moment when you look in the mirror and decide to change what's been hurting you, even if no one else notices. David came to understand that with time. The day he chose to learn how to make his own bread dough instead of buying it ready-made, that was a new beginning. The day he decided to close the diner at 7 to have dinner with his daughter, that was another. Courage lives in those details. Apologizing for an old mistake. Saying good morning like you mean it. Letting go of a shirt that no longer fits, not just on your body, but in your story. Some people start over by going back to therapy. Some do it by saying no to an invitation they used to accept out of habit. Some do it by choosing to walk slowly instead of rushing like they always did. David began noticing those little victories. He no longer thought courage meant climbing mountains. Sometimes, it was just getting out of bed with a heavy heart and still making coffee. David used to think of time as a train, one you had to catch early, because if you missed your station, that was it. Life was about boarding, keeping schedule, staying on track, until he realized that train wasn't the only one. And sometimes stepping off and walking the road is the better choice. At 50, he learned to measure time differently, not in goals or deadlines, but in long conversations, recipes tried out, songs stumbled upon by accident. He saw that when life slows down, it becomes clearer. Details have sound. Gestures carry weight. He also started seeing himself differently. For years, he was the accounting guy, a badge, a title, a last name and a corporate email. But now, he was just David. And that was enough. More than enough. It was freeing. Nobody wakes up one day and declares, "I'm going to reinvent myself." That happens slowly. In unanswered questions, in silences that used to scare you, and now feel like home, in new desires that show up when you thought there were no surprises left. David realized that aging doesn't mean losing possibilities. It means gaining discernment. You stop chasing everything and start choosing what truly matters. You don't need to impress anymore. You just want to be whole. He didn't have the same energy as before, but he had a rare calm and a sense of direction that only comes after stumbling a lot. What once felt like weakness, stopping, changing, doubting, had become his greatest strength. And maybe, he thought, that's the real secret, living in a way that Even if no one claps, you know you're on the right path. Starting over at 50 isn't madness. Madness is continuing to live a life that no longer fits you, just because it is the one you've always lived. True courage is being honest enough to say something needs to change, and grounded enough to take that step. The truth is, age doesn't define when your story ends. Sometimes just when the world assumes your time has passed, your best chapter begins. David didn't have everything figured out, but for the first time, he felt whole. Not because he had reached a peak, but because he had reconnected with himself, without labels, without roles, without needing to prove anything. If you're sitting there wondering whether it's too late to try something new, maybe that question is the best sign that it's exactly the right time. Because now, unlike before, you don't need approval, just purpose. If this story resonated with you, give it a like, share it with someone who might need a fresh start, and let us know in the comments. Have you ever had to start over? Or are you about to?